August 1944, Normandy, France. Just south of Caen. The sun is baking the fields, but the air is choked with the acrid smoke of burnt steel and dust. Private Jack Thompson, a Canadian infantry soldier, presses himself flat against a hedgerow. Ahead, his M4 Sherman tanks surge forward, only to pull back seconds later. The German 80 mm guns and heavy machine guns are relentless, turning the open fields into a killing zone. Jack turns to his sergeant, spitting dirt. They're too fast. We can't keep up with the armor, and we can't cross that field without it. We're pinned down. Sarge, like always, the summer following the D-Day landings was meant to be a swift, triumphant dash across France. Instead, it devolved into a brutal, grinding siege in the unforgiving farmlands and dense hedgerows of Normandy. The Allied forces, particularly the British and Canadians, were locked in a static, bloody battle against a tenacious German defense. The German forces, though outnumbered, used the terrain and superior fire discipline to great effect. The fundamental strategic problem faced by the Allies was known as the infantry armor dilemma. In modern warfare, tanks, the Sherman and the Cromwell, are designed to punch holes in the enemy's line and exploit breakthroughs. Their thick armor protects them from most small arms, fire and machine guns. However, tanks are tactically blind without their supporting infantry. The infantry's job is to clear anti-tank threats, like mines, Panzerfaust teams and concealed ATR guns, that the tank cannot see. The infantry secures the terrain, the tanks gain. The dilemma was that the infantry were far too slow and completely exposed. While the tanks could surge forward, the infantry had to follow on foot, traveling in thin-skinned trucks, or often simply walking. This meant that the armored spearhead quickly outpaced its vital infantry support. When the tanks were forced to slow down or halt in the face of German artillery and machine gun fire, the following infantry were immediately exposed. The result was a devastating, self-defeating pattern. Tanks advanced alone, were picked off by concealed anti-tank threats, and the infantry, having lost their armored shield, were then pinned down by relentless small arms fire. This inability to rapidly move infantry under fire alongside the tanks was the primary reason the Allied advance in Normandy stalled for weeks. The Germans understood this weakness perfectly and exploited it by maintaining intense, continuous fire on any area that might conceal Allied troops. The Canadian First Army found themselves right in the thick of this frustrating stagnation. General Eberbach, the commander of German Panzer Group West, viewed the Canadian effort with a distinct sense of condescension to the established and battle-hardened German High Command. The Canadian Army was often seen as merely a rookie force, a minor extension of the powerful British Army, lacking its own distinct tactical doctrine or innovative spirit. They assumed the Canadians would adhere rigidly to the flawed British practice of separating infantry and armor. This dismissive assessment was a grave miscalculation, rooted in the German belief that innovation only came from established centers of power. The Canadians, however, were practical and highly motivated engineers, often far less bound by bureaucratic military tradition than their British and American counterparts. They were fighting on a terrain that demanded immediate, radical solutions. The Canadian High Command, led by Lieutenant General Guy Simons, was keenly aware that the core problem was not the tanks themselves, but the delivery system for the infantry. The infantry needed a vehicle that met three impossible requirements. Speed. It had to keep pace with the 30-40 Messerschmitt charge of the M4 Sherman tanks. Armor. It had to provide protection comparable to the tanks against machine gun fire and shrapnel, something a soft-skinned truck simply could not do. Capacity. It had to carry a full infantry section, around 10 men, and their equipment into the heart of the battle. The existing American half-track, while an improvement, was still thinly armored and mechanically prone to failure in the brutal conditions of the Normandy mud. It was simply not robust enough to ride directly behind a tank in the face of German direct fire. General Simons realized that the solution could not come from the factories back home. The war was moving too fast. The solution had to be found and forged on the battlefield itself, using existing, abundant resources. He looked at the vast pool of American-built M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers currently in use by the Allies. The Priest, a useful but somewhat limited self-propelled artillery piece, was built on the reliable M3 Lee Grant tank chassis and, crucially, had thick armor and an open-topped fighting compartment. Simons saw not an artillery piece, but a chassis, a heavily armored, fast-moving battlefield taxi, waiting to be born. The M7 Priest was about to be replaced by the British 25-pounder Sexton self-propelled gun, meaning hundreds of these heavily armored chassis would soon be available. The problem was not a lack of armor, but a lack of imagination. Simons' revolutionary idea was simple, brutal, and brilliant. Remove the gun, fill the hole with infantry. This radical concept, born from the urgent necessity of breaking the Normandy stalemate, was a direct rejection of established military norms. It was a secret weapon forged not on a drawing board, but in the grime and chaos of the front-line workshop, about to give the rookie Canadian Army a decisive and completely unexpected advantage. August 5th, 1944. A secret Canadian Army workshop, deep within a captured orchard near Caen. The stench of hydraulic fluid and burnt metal hangs in the air. Lieutenant General Guy Simons, the visionary commander, stands with his chief engineer, Brigadier E.L. Tommy Miller. Around them, flames spew from cutting torches as soldiers dismantle M7 Priest self-propelled guns. Simons points to the discarded 105mm howitzer barrel. "We don't need the gun. Brigadier, we need the space. Take the gun out. Weld plates over the ammo racks. Give my infantry a steel box that moves at tank speed. It's crude, but it's the only way to break this stalemate. We start converting them. Now." The critical impasse in Normandy, where Allied tanks surged ahead only to be crippled by anti-tank teams because their infantry support could not keep pace, demanded a solution that was radical, cheap, and immediate. It was an engineering problem compounded by a logistical one. Any vehicle requested from the factories back in North America or Britain would arrive months too late. The solution, therefore, had to be an improvisation, a desperate, field-expedient conversion using materials already available at the front line. The man who provided this revolutionary answer was Lieutenant General Guy Simons, commander of the Canadian II Corps. Simons was not just a tactician, he was an innovator who understood the relationship between armor and infantry better than most. He correctly identified the American-built M7 Priest self-propelled howitzer as the perfect, if unconventional, solution. The M7 Priest was an American self-propelled artillery piece built on the robust chassis of the M3 Lee Grant tank. It featured armor thick enough to resist small arms and shrapnel, a reliable engine, and, crucially, an open-topped fighting compartment. While the Priest was a useful weapon, it was about to be replaced in the Canadian and British ranks by the superior British-made Sexton self-propelled gun. This meant that hundreds of heavily armored, fast-moving chassis were suddenly available for repurposing. Simons' idea was breathtakingly simple and brutally effective. Why wait for an armored personnel carrier, APC, to be designed and built overseas when you can strip an obsolete self-propelled gun? The order was given to the Canadian Army workshop teams in the field. The mission was immediate. Take the M7 Priest, remove its main armament, the 105mm howitzer, remove the intricate mechanisms and sights, and use the newly freed space to seat infantrymen. The entire process was carried out under extreme urgency and with minimal formal planning. This was engineering driven by necessity, not blueprints. The conversion process was a masterclass in battlefield improvisation, gun removal. The primary step involved carefully removing the massive 105mm howitzer and its heavy mounting hardware. This instantly freed up a substantial amount of space in the open-topped compartment. Structural modifications. The large on-open hole left by the howitzer had to be addressed. Simple steel plates, often scavenged or hastily fabricated, were used to cover the space where the ammunition racks and mechanisms had been. The floor of the fighting compartment, previously designed for gun crews, was modified to accommodate sitting infantry. The firing position, the distinctive fixed machine gun turret, the pulpit on the front of the priest, was often left in place, providing a ready-made heavy machine gun position for the infantry section commander, ensuring the vehicle still had potent, short-range defensive fire. Seating was rudimentary. Wooden benches or improvised supports were bolted down to secure the soldiers during the high-speed dash across the rough ground. The focus was not on comfort, but on getting the men, their weapons, and their anti-tank equipment safely to the objective. The resulting vehicle was crude, yet revolutionary. It retained the excellent off-road mobility and speed of the M7 chassis, allowing it to keep pace with the Shermans. More importantly, the thick armor of the Priest chassis provided the infantry with near-tank level protection against machine gun fire and shrapnel, the exact defense they had been desperately lacking. This improvised APC quickly gained a distinctive nickname from the Canadian soldiers, the Kangaroo. The name was a perfect fit, referencing the open-topped vehicle's function as a protected carrier that ferried its pouch of infantry to the point of danger. The reaction from Allied observers outside the Canadian Corps was initially one of disbelief and skepticism. The British command, steeped in tradition, found the idea of deliberately disarming a functional artillery piece to create a battlefield taxi to be nearly heretical. They preferred the planned, factory-built solutions. The Americans, focused on their own logistical supply of half-tracks, were also unsure. This initial dismissal was part of the secret nature of the Kangaroo. It was a Canadian improvisation, built by necessity, not by official doctrine. The conversion was timed perfectly for Operation Totalize. The major Allied thrust south from Caen, designed to break the static Normandy stalemate. Simmons' audacious plan for Totalize hinged entirely on the Kangaroo. He envisioned a massive, coordinated night attack, a true armored blitzkrieg, where tanks and their supporting infantry, riding safely in the newly converted APCs, would charge forward together, side by side, maintaining cohesion and speed. Hundreds of M7 Priests were quickly converted into Kangaroos just days before the launch of Operation Totalize. The crews were trained in their new, unconventional role, no longer artillery gunners, but battlefield drivers and infantry transporters. The success of the Kangaroo was about to be put to the ultimate test. It was a secret weapon born of desperation, forged in fire and steel by the rookie Canadian engineers, and it was about to shock the entire German High Command by rewriting the tactical playbook of the Western Front. The infantry, for the first time since D-Day, would ride into battle with their tanks, turning the fragmented Allied attack into a unified, unstoppable force. August 8th, 1944, 11 p.m., the front line south of Caen. The night is split by the continuous roar of Allied artillery. Operation Totalize has begun. Under the blinding glare of searchlights aimed at the clouds, Operation Canal Defense Light, hundreds of Canadian Sherman tanks surge forward in 4 distinct columns. Immediately behind them, barely visible in the dust and chaos, are the converted M7 Priests, the Kangaroos, packed with infantry. Corporal Jack Thompson, riding in the back of a Kangaroo, grips his rifle, the vibrations of the tank tracks shaking his teeth. He watches the muzzle flash of the Sherman ahead. "This is it. Sarge," he yells over the noise. "We're riding right through their line." The birth of the Kangaroo was a desperate, field-expedient response to a tactical disaster. Its true test and the revelation of its genius came during Operation Totalize, launched by the Canadian First Army on August 8, 1944. The goal of Totalize was to break the protracted stalemate south of Caen, achieving a deep, decisive armored penetration that would finally turn the static siege into a mobile war. Lieutenant General Guy Simon's plan for Totalize was a radical departure from the slow, infantry-led assaults that had plagued the British and Canadian sectors. It was a night attack, a risky maneuver designed to blind the German defenders, and it relied entirely on the perfect cohesion of armor and infantry. Made possible by the Kangaroo, the attack was revolutionary. The Canadian forces organized their armored divisions into massive columns, known as armored corridors. The core of the formation was simple: Sherman tanks in the lead, followed immediately by the Kangaroos carrying the infantry. For the first time, the speed of the infantry matched the speed of the tanks, as the Canadian armored columns roared across the German lines in the dead of night. The effect was immediate and devastating. The German forward defenses, expecting a slow, predictable infantry advance after the initial artillery barrage, were completely overwhelmed. The key to the Kangaroo's success in Totalize was its ability to negate the German infantry's counter-tactics. Previously, when German defenders saw tanks advance without close infantry support, they would allow the tanks to pass and then emerge from their concealed positions to destroy the tanks from the rear with Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. They would then use heavy machine guns to pin down the exposed following infantry. With the Kangaroo, this doctrine failed spectacularly. As the German anti-tank crews emerged to hit the Canadian tanks, they were immediately met by a section of heavily armed infantry who had dismounted simultaneously with the tank's halting position. The Kangaroo deposited its troops directly onto the objective, providing a protected, mobile platform for the infantry to secure the area against anti-tank teams and clear any obstacles. The German anti-tank crews, unable to deal with the instant, armored protected infantry assault, were neutralized or forced to retreat. The German response was slow and based on faulty intelligence. Initially, reports filtering back to the German command headquarters, HQ, were confused. Field commanders reported massive numbers of American half-tracks, but their performance was unlike anything seen before. They were faster, more numerous, and shrugged off light anti-tank fire that would have crippled a standard half-track. Then came the visual evidence. German reconnaissance flights and captured prisoners quickly confirmed the existence of a new Allied vehicle, a heavily armored carrier based on the Priest chassis, but lacking its main gun. The shock that went through the German command was profound. They realized that the rookie Canadian Army had not only identified the fatal flaw in the Allied attack doctrine, but had developed a field-expedient countermeasure that was utterly original. German intelligence officers struggled to classify the new machine. They had no counterpart for it. It was too armored to be a half-track, too fast to be a cargo truck, and too specialized to be a tank. The realization that the Canadians were capable of such rapid, practical innovation and had hidden its development so effectively was a massive psychological blow. The German command had been completely taken by surprise by a vehicle that was literally fabricated in a captured apple orchard just weeks before the battle. The immediate result of the Kangaroo's deployment was the decisive success of Operation Totalize. The Canadian armored columns achieved an unprecedented penetration of 9 miles on the first night alone, shattering the entrenched German lines south of Caen and opening the path to Falaise. The infantry, protected by the Kangaroo's armor, arrived fresh, intact, and ready to fight, eliminating the delay and vulnerability that had crippled previous assaults. The Kangaroo had proven the absolute necessity of the Armored Personnel Carrier, APC concept. It was the crucial technological pivot that allowed the Allies to effectively combine the speed of armor with the fighting power of the infantry, creating the unified mech infantry unit that would define post-war military doctrine. While crude, ugly, and born of necessity, the Kangaroo was the machine that broke the stagnation in Normandy. It was the Canadian Army's secret weapon, a brilliant piece of battlefield engineering that shocked the German command and ensured the Allied momentum could finally carry the war out of the hedgerows and into the open plains of France. Late 1944, a Canadian Army Staff College, England. Lieutenant General Guy Simonds stands beside a captured German intelligence report. The report details the shock caused by the new Canadian Armored Transport Vehicle and emphasizes the critical failure of the German defense to counter it. Simonds smiles faintly, pointing to the line, "The enemy has successfully reunited armor and infantry." The report confirms his gamble paid off. The Kangaroo, an ugly, improvised machine, had secured its place in the history of warfare. The successful deployment of the Kangaroo during Operation Totalize was far more than a one-off tactical victory. It was a watershed moment that permanently altered the relationship between armor and infantry. The Canadian Army, once condescendingly viewed as rookie by the German High Command, had innovated a solution to the fundamental tactical flaw that had stalled the entire Allied invasion. The German command was left reeling from the shock of discovering that their supposed minor opponent had created a secret war machine that rewrote the rules of the battlefield. The legacy of the Kangaroo is defined by the revolution of the battlefield taxi, the immediate, protected transport of infantry to the point of friction. Before the Kangaroo, the infantry's presence on the battlefield was intermittent and vulnerable. After the Kangaroo, the concept of mechanized infantry riding in armored carriers that could sustain the same pace and protection levels as the tanks, became the new doctrine. The Kangaroo proved that infantry should arrive at the objective fresh, protected, and ready to fight, rather than exhausted and vulnerable after a long walk through open fire. This new capability immediately translated into higher engagement success rates and dramatically reduced infantry casualties, creating a combined arms force that was more cohesive, faster, and far more difficult for the Germans to defeat. The tactical effects were immediate and widespread across the entire Western Front. The Allied forces, particularly the Canadians, continued to use the Kangaroo concept extensively in subsequent operations, including the final push across Northwest Europe. The initial M7 Priest chassis were later supplemented by similar conversions of the Canadian-built Ram tank, also stripped of its gun to create a highly effective APC. This standardized, if crude, fleet of armored carriers became essential for maintaining the momentum of the advance. The most profound impact of the Kangaroo was the destruction of the German defense-in-depth model. The German tactics relied on separating Allied tanks from their infantry support. Once separated, the tanks were destroyed by specialized anti-tank teams, and the infantry were pinned. The Kangaroo foiled this by forcing the German anti-tank teams to choose: engage the heavily armored tanks, or risk being overrun by the infantry immediately dismounting from the armored Kangaroo. In most cases, the presence of the infantry, dismounting under fire with their heavy weapons, was enough to neutralize the anti-tank threat before it could even aim at the Shermans. The fact that the Kangaroo was an improvisation spoke volumes about Canadian military culture during the war. Unburdened by the vast, slow bureaucracy of their larger allies, the Canadian field commanders and engineers were granted the autonomy to take massive risks and execute them rapidly. The transformation of a relatively mundane artillery piece into a world-changing infantry carrier took place in a matter of days, a speed of innovation that stunned the established military powers. The success of the Kangaroo demonstrated that necessity truly is the mother of invention, and that some of the war's most crucial technological leaps were born not in high-tech labs, but in muddy workshops near the front line. The lasting technological legacy of the Kangaroo is undeniable. It is the direct ancestor of every modern armored personnel carrier, APC, and infantry fighting vehicle, IFV, in use by armies around the world today. Post-war designs like the American M113 and later IFVs owe their fundamental concept, a high-speed, heavily armored box designed to deliver a fighting squad into combat directly to the crude, gunless M7 Priest conversions of 1944. The idea, born in a Canadian apple orchard, defined the structure of the modern mechanized army. The story of the Kangaroo is the ultimate tale of battlefield ingenuity. A secret weapon forged from necessity that shocked the enemy and broke the Normandy deadlock. It proves that innovation often comes from the most unexpected places. The rookie army with the clever engineers. If you found this untold history of Canadian military genius fascinating and want to learn more about the crucial, unconventional inventions that helped the Allies win World War II, we need your help to keep these stories alive. Please subscribe to our channel right now and hit that notification bell. Also, tell us in the comments below. Which other improvised Canadian or Allied war machine do you think had the biggest impact? The final irony of the Kangaroo story is the German reaction. After initially dismissing the Canadians, their military staff were forced to write extensive reports documenting the Kangaroo's existence and its devastating effect on their lines. The German command, which had prided itself on its own technological prowess and tactical mobility, was ultimately outflanked by the simple, radical thinking of Lieutenant General Simons and his mechanics. The Kangaroo was ultimately phased out as factory-built APCs became available, but its impact lasted generations. It cemented Canada's reputation not just as a reliable supplier of manpower, but as a crucial source of military innovation and practical engineering during the most demanding conflict in human history. The legacy of the Kangaroo is the realization that in the chaos of war, the most effective weapon is often the one built with a welder and a brilliant idea, turning an obsolete chassis into a vehicle that revolutionized the battlefield and delivered the infantry to victory.